Honorable former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, respected Professor Ketkar, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is rather embarrassing to speak after Dr. Manmohan Singh and Professor Ketkar because I neither hold any post or held any post, nor am I a scholar of the repute of Professor Ketkar. I happen to be the member of the media which has become so philistine that many people might wonder why a media person is invited in the first place to give the good keynote address. But just to put the 125th anniversary of Pandit Nehru, birth anniversary of Pandit Nehru, in larger perspective, I would say that 75 years from now, in 2089-2090, when it will be 200th birth anniversary of Pandit Nehru, would India then still remember him? Nobody here present today, without my best wishes, will be alive to see the 200th birth anniversary. Some of them might feel lucky that they will not be there. Some of them might feel to be unlucky that they will not be there. Going by the current atmosphere in the country, many people might wonder whether they should be there in the 150th anniversary also. But that we have forgotten Pandit Nehru's legacy in our own lifetime is very evident from the fact that the forces about which Pandit Nehru warned consistently that they will one day try to take over the state and the social systems, we have neglected, we have ignored, we have been indifferent to his warnings. I'll just quote to you what Pandit Nehru said in a letter to Chief Minister in 1947 December, that is only 4 months after independence and just 1 month before Gandhiji was killed. And I quote, Nehru writes to Chief Ministers in one of the letters on December 7, 1947, I will quote, "We have a great deal of evidence to show that the RSS is an organization which is proceeding on the strictest Nazi lines, even following the technique of its organization. It is not our desire to interfere with even their civil liberties, but their activity more and more goes beyond the limits, and it is desirable for provincial governments at that time to keep a watchful eye and to take such action as they may deem necessary. I have some knowledge," Nehru said, "I have some knowledge of the way Nazi movement developed in Germany. It attracted by its superficial trappings and strict discipline young men for whom life appeared to offer little to attract them. And they drifted towards the Nazi party because in policy and programs such as they were of the Nazis were very simple, negative, and did not require an active effort of the mind. The Nazi party brought Germany to ruin. I have very little doubt that if these tendencies are allowed to spread and increase in India, their tentacles, they would do enormous injury to India. No doubt India would survive, but she would be grievously wounded and would take a long time to recover." This was said in 1947. Nobody at that time really believed that time will come when those forces will actually take over the state and most of the social systems and start having their hegemony over education systems, culture, history and everything. This was what he said in 1947, and I don't think we really followed the warnings that he gave or the instructions that he gave. If we had done that, perhaps this would not happen. So it is not enough to blame the Nazi-style fascism of the RSS. Our indifference, our collective indifference, our political indifference to the threats have brought them to power. Why I gave reference to 200th birth anniversary of Nehru is because many of the people, many of the leading scientists today in the world, some of them environmentalists, including James Lovelock and scientists like Stephen Hawking and Martin Rees, have said, perhaps we are living in the last century. This may be the last century in which human civilization will grow and perhaps end with catastrophe. It could be environmental catastrophe, it could be terrorism, it could be war, it could be nuclear war, it could be anything, but perhaps we are living in the last century. We will not be there to see whether this century really is completed properly. But we are today to see that not only this century, but next century is also come and let civilization grow. But for that, we will have to take cognizance of the historical process that are evolving or have been evolving for the last 125 years. It was exactly 75 years ago in 1940, Charlie Chaplin made a film called The Great Dictator. Some of you may have seen. Those who have not seen, I would recommend them to see. It is available on YouTube. In Great Dictator, every time Great Dictator film I see or I bring around on YouTube, I see current Prime Minister Narendra Modi talking in the language of Hitler, which is caricatured by Charlie Chaplin in that film. But remember, when Charlie Chaplin made that film in 1940, Nazis were winning. Nazis had already captured much of what was known later on as Eastern Europe. He had yet to begin his Russian adventure, and it was in Russian adventure that he faced his first major setback. 1941, when Hitler invaded Russia and came very close to Moscow and Stalingrad, it was Stalingrad which turned the tide of the Second World War and forced Nazis back. But for Stalingrad, even Churchill said later, but for the valor of the Red Army in Stalingrad, Churchill said, of all the persons, that world would not have seen re-emergence of democratic forces and re-emergence of democracy. So to Red Army, for re-emergence of democracy, credit came from the arch-imperialist Winston Churchill. It would be hyperbolic for me to say, and it may, some of the scholars of history might consider as totally wrong historical analogy. But I would dare to say, in our small way, Bihar, day after tomorrow, will prove to be our Stalingrad. The Indian version of Nazi forces will be turned, I am sure, in Bihar, when the democratic forces will win. And that will perhaps, hopefully, begin the climb down of the RSS and the BJP and Narendra Modi, about whom Jawaharlal Nehru warned way back in 1947. The reference I gave of Charlie Chaplin is for two reasons. Charlie Chaplin was born the same year that Pandit Nehru was born, in 1889. So it will be also 200th birth anniversary in 2089 of Charlie Chaplin. When Charlie Chaplin was not yet fully evolved as Charlie Chaplin, and he was struggling as a tramp in England, It was in those days Pandit Nehru happened to be in Harrow and Cambridge. Pandit Nehru was there only for 7 years, till 1912, from 1905. Charlie Chaplin's first film, silent film, was made sometime in 1921. But the influences that Charlie Chaplin had on him were ideological, political, cultural and social. And the same influences Pandit Nehru carried throughout his life. It was not as if he immediately studied Marx or became socialist immediately after going there, because Karl Marx's works were not even fully translated. Karl Marx's works began to get published in English. The first volume came out in 1897 when Friedrich Engels launched it. And Pandit Nehru was there in 1905 when Marx literature was not available. Russian Revolution had not taken place. Only thing that had happened was that the Japanese had defeated in 1905 Russia when Nehru was in Europe, when Nehru was in England. Nehru was immensely happy at that victory of the Japanese because for the first time in many years, a European imperialist nation, Tsarist Russia, was defeated by an Asian country. Pandit Nehru then was quite young, and yet he felt inspired by the victory. But as the years went by, and as Professor Habib said, when he came back in 1912, Gandhiji was nowhere in sight. Congress was in shambles. Lokmanya Tilak was in jail, and Congress was wondering which direction to take. No specific program, no specific organization, no specific leadership. And in 1915 came Gandhiji to India, and not as if he immediately established his leadership, he came to India. And the same year when Gandhiji came, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who brought him here actually, he died. So this year is the 100th anniversary of Gopal Krishna Gokhale's death, as well as 100th anniversary of Gandhiji's arrival in India. At that time, Pandit Nehru was too young to decide, particularly because his father was a moderate in Congress politics, and Pandit Nehru was getting tremendous energy from the rebellious mood in England, primarily because of the Fabian socialist movement that he saw and had debates in Cambridge heard, in which Sidney and Beatrice Wave and Harold Lasky and others participated. Nehru was young, but Nehru was energetic and thought that these ideas really mattered. One can say by hindsight that Nehru could have chosen to be a free market person. That was also one of the dominant ideologies then. Nehru could have also chosen to be a conservative Hindu. Savarkar was also in England. He was arrested in 1910. So Savarkar could become Hindu in the same British atmosphere, influenced by Mazzini. Nehru could have become Hindu, nationalist. Nehru could have become market forces, right-wing nationalist, economic-wise. And yet, he was influenced by the then progressive ideas before Russian Revolution. The idea of socialism hit him because Nehru, I think, could see the future, and that future was determined by compassion and social justice, which were the hallmarks of Charlie Chaplin's films. Those who have seen the film like The Kid, those who have seen the films like Modern Times. Actually, Modern Times is a film made 1936. Modern Times is a film which actually projects today's corporate capitalism that we should have. There was no television in 1936. There were no time and motion studies which the corporate culture insists. And yet in 1936 Modern Times film, the way Charlie Chaplin as a worker is harassed and exploited and oppressed by the then management of the then corporate class, you will feel that you are seeing what is happening today across the world in the capitalist class and so-called managements which talk about market forces and talk more about productivity than about distributive justice. So the point is that people who were visionaries, whether in the cultural and art field, like Charles Chaplin, or Pandit Nehru, who were in politics and social life, were able to see what was coming. Their life and their ideologies were triggered after 1917, after the Russian Revolution. I think it is necessary to understand those influences of Nehru, on Nehru, if we have to really remember and continue the legacy that he had, because we, unfortunately or fortunately, do not have the same influences today. Today, anywhere in the word liberal is condemned as an abuse. The word idealism is considered as romantic or naive. The word genuine internationalism and not globalization in that sense, genuine humanitarianism, world humanitarianism is considered as too simplistic. The only globalization that we understand and we talk today is what is told to us by the so-called advocates of market forces and the global capitalist forces. And yet, in the very land from where this ideology of the market forces has been advocated, there was the movement called 99 versus 1. 99 people versus one corporate sector representative trying to take over the world in the name of globalization. That was the spirit, and that is the spirit perhaps in that New York garden. None of those young people mentioned Nehru or perhaps not even mentioned Gandhi. But they were essentially talking the language of Gandhiji and Nehru when they had their movement, global movement in New York. It was that movement which has triggered even next year's presidential election in the United States. So let us not forget that idealism is dead. Let us not forget that socialism and social justice, issues of social justice are now past. The candidate there, Bernie Sanders, is openly saying in America that too, that he is a socialist and still campaigning for his presidency for the next election. Which means that the ideas which dominated in 1912 to 1915 or 1905 to 1912 when Pandit Nehru was in England, those ideas have not died. But we in India have allowed them to disappear. I'll just give you a simple example. Secularism was the top agenda of ideology of Pandit Nehru. We incorporated that term in the Constitution in 1976, but not a single school, not a single college, not a single university in India has even in syllabus a course on what the hell that secularism means. What is secularism? What is republic? What is secular liberal republic that we are supposed to be? There is no course, there is no education, and all those young boys and girls today who are governed by social media do not know these terms, or if they know these terms as abuse. Fault is theirs, but more is ours. The generation which did not allow these things, these issues to be dominating the discourse, not only in academic world but political world. In politics, we may have incorporated in the Constitution the term secular. We may be dividing the polity and the political parties on the basis of secular and non-secular, communal and non-communal, but we have never actually gone out to tell the world what actually it means and what we stand for. Because if secularism is gone, India is gone. There will be no India. There will be no republic. And I think the grievous injury about which Pandit Nehru warned us is already made on the body polity of India in last 2 years, what you can say overall in last 5 years. And in last 2 years, the respectability and the acceptability of the Hindu Rashtra concept, the acceptability of the anti-secularism and anti-liberalism as political ethos, newly emerging ethos, has been actually directing the political affairs, and those who proclaim secular and liberal and democratic and republicans always find themselves not only on defensive, but I am sorry to say some of them privately have succumbed to the idea of non-secular world. How many drawing rooms of the so-called earlier secular liberal politicians privately discussed, but after all, those Muslims must be taught a lesson. After all, those Dalits have gone too far. This is the language one hears in the elite middle class houses, which used to talk about Congress, Nehru and Gandhiji as glibly as they today talk about Hinduism and Hindutva, as if they are the same terms. Therefore, by not incorporating the idea of secularism in our academic courses, in our political discourses, the media has become Philistine. I am a member of the media and I know how Philistine and how hopelessly communal or sensationalist we have become. But partly it is our fault and partly it is the fault of our political class, which has failed even to integrate these ideas, these ideals and these ideologies into the arena, political arena, which will then influence even the media persons. Not only the media persons, the legal luminaries, the academics and the media all have given their hands up to the forces which are totally regressive. And that is why I said, if tomorrow's Bihar elections prove to be our own surrender by turning away the fascistic forces which have taken over India, that will be perhaps just the beginning. But that beginning does not mean that it will bring about a positive end. Because that beginning will have to be strengthened by continuation of constant, tireless discourse of these ideas. I am not sure any political party, I don't want to name, any political party has taken up on its agenda, top agenda, the so-called leftist liberal parties have not taken up it as a political agenda for promoting Nehruvian values. It is perfectly all right to celebrate and remember Pandit Nehru on his 125th birth anniversary. It is perfectly all right to remember his 50th death anniversary, but I think it has become, like typical in Indian culture, all such anniversaries like pujas, and we celebrate, we perform them, we forget about them, go about doing our own life as if nothing happened, nothing existed before and later will exist. So I think the time has come, and particularly globally, where there are no saviors in the world today. Ironically, the only person who is talking sense and about global peace and global justice, even in the question of migrants, is ironically, it is Pope and no political leader. I distinctly remember when I was in school in 1962 and India-China war was about to take place, and in Cuba there was a nuclear confrontation between Russia and America. Kennedy was president, Khrushchev was the head of the state, general secretary of the Communist Party, and only three people, actually only two people, intervened to avoid the nuclear war. One was Pandit Nehru and the second was Bertrand Russell. Both of them wrote letters, argued with Khrushchev and John Kennedy to see that the world does not end in catastrophe, nuclear catastrophe. If they go to war, they will destroy the world in the name of their egos, in the name of their nationalism, in the name of their ideologies, and this must not happen. Same thing had happened 9 years before at the time of Korean War in 1953. Pandit Nehru had intervened. Today, in the world, which is already on the brink of total disintegration, political disintegration and economic disintegration, there is nobody, no voice equal to Bertrand Russell in non-political world, and no voice equal to Pandit Nehru in political world. It is no coincidence that it was in 1955-1956 partition took place, and in 1961, non-alignment movement came, and 1962 the nuclear war was threatening the world, just 1 year after non-alignment movement. If non-alignment movement was not there, and if particular leadership was not there, perhaps the world could have gone through catastrophe even much before. It did not happen because Nehru's ideas, not just Nehru's legacy, dominated the global politics, not only Indian politics. Today, we have forgotten Nehru's politics. We remember Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru without his ideology, without his ideas, without his ideals, without his politics. And if that is to happen, we are heading for a much greater danger, irrespective of Bihar. We must not remain complacent at all. Because of our collective complacence, our political irresponsibility, of all liberal and progressive parties and ideological neglect of Nehru's legacy, we are in the present predicament. I am not sure whether we have really understood Nehru's politics, his philosophy and his global perspective. That is what we should preserve and promote, so that the people all over the world are able to live in freedom and in peace, which was the theme of today's conference. The world would be in real trouble if we forget what Pandit Nehru warned us way back in 1947 and all through his life, and perhaps died not a happy man because some of his dreams, some of his ideals were shattered. Somewhere in 1974, the countdown to today's fascism began. In the name of total devolution, we started promoting the forces of anarchy, and those forces of anarchy spread into the hands of the fascistic forces led by the RSS. Let us not forget that RSS was formally incorporated in the total revolution movement in 1974 by no less than Jayaprakash Narayan, perhaps out of naivete or perhaps out of his political exigency. Be that as it may, but similar threat of some of the progressive people going softly and then defend such regressive forces has happened in the past, is happening today. Many of my earlier comrades, many of my earlier liberal friends, many of my well-known liberal journalists and literateurs have started or had started last year slowly defending the ideas that Narendra Modi was promoting. I think the threat therefore remains, and that threat, unless we pursue in its fullest dangerous aspect, I think Nehru's 125th birth anniversary celebration would go waste. We will not allow it to go to waste. As Nehru said, India will survive, but it would be grievously injured and it will be difficult to recover. Already we have come to that stage where it will be very, very difficult to recover, but we must start getting ourselves into the political ideology, that is, into ICU, before we are forced to go on ventilator. Thank you.